This is part one of Bull and Bloom's Inside the Album, W.A.S.P, the 1984 self-titled album.
It's a bunch of people that nobody wanted, and you give people like that, right, you give people like that a common cause, or goal to believe in. You've got nitroglycerin wrapped up in a package that says rock and roll on it, so.
On August 28, 1982, W.A.S.P took the stage for their very first show at a Los Angeles club called the Woodstock. W.A.S.P frontman Blackie Lawless said, "It's impossible for anyone to foresee the ways life will change when those dreams become reality. For us that were part of this historic night, the importance of this show cannot be overstated. It would be the first night anyone would hear Love Machine, On Your Knees, Hellion, and School Days. I remember taking the stage that night and thinking, nobody knows who we are and nobody knows these songs. From this night, that record, everything we did in the beginning, almost 2 years to the date of the release of our first album, all that would change." The lineup for the debut show featured Blackie Lawless on guitar and vocals, Chris Holmes on lead guitar, Tony Richards on drums, and Don Costa on bass. Lawless said, "The first show was played in August of '82, but I was still playing guitar. Don Costa was playing bass. Don was a fantastic player and performer and was a real star. He used to do a routine where he nailed a metal cheese grater to the back of his bass. In the middle of the show, he turned the bass over and started grating his knuckles on it, blood streaming down his arm." During a 2007 Full and Bloom interview with Tony Richards, the drummer talked about Costa.
Don Costa, freak. Great bass player, but man, the guy was out there. Just showmanship all the way and just an incredible player.
But we started doing these bizarre things on stage to get attention, because the first time we played a gig live, we drew like 33 people and made $67, right? So we went back to the drawing board for about 2 weeks, and we started doing these things. We started telling people that we were going to do these things. The next time we played somewhere, the place was packed, and we made like about $500. The next time we go, God, we're on the road to riches here now, boy. I'll tell you. Right, really.
"We knew from having lived in L.A. for quite a while," Lawless explained, "that you really didn't get signed by playing live. Our true intention was only to make records, and the real way to get a record deal was to make the best demo tape you can make. So I wrote this batch of songs, and we made demos of songs that would end up being mostly our first album. We thought, these aren't bad. We sent them out. We're waiting for a response. 6 weeks go by, and we haven't heard a thing from anybody. Why don't we try them in front of people, just to make sure we're not absolutely crazy?" The next question then was, okay, how do we present it? Although Costa's presence and sound added a crucial element to W.A.S.P, his tenure with the band was short-lived due to an altercation with Chris Holmes. During a recent Full and Bloom interview with Holmes, the guitarist recalled the incident.
"When I joined the band W.A.S.P, before I joined, Randy was in the band. There was a bass player named Don Costa. It was Don Costa, Blackie on rhythm, and Tony playing drums. Randy was in the band, but they threw him out to get me in. And Don was an outrageous player. He played with his fingers. Well, what happened is we played the first show, and Don, he was playing his bass out of tune. The last 2 songs that really flipped me out and pissed me off. And he was playing with his amp on. He was playing notes. If you're out of tune, you shut your guitar off, or your amp, or whatever. You shut off and you tune it. You don't play out of tune, but he's played out of tune. And I told him, I go, "Don, if you ever play out of tune again, I'm going to chew your balls off and spit them in your face on stage. Don't ever do that with me again." He quit. So we had some shows lined up, and Blackie freaked out and was like, "Blame me for it, blah, 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 blah." And he's like, "Well, we can bring Randy back in. He knows the songs, and I'll just switch over to the bass." That's how Blackie went to bass. He brought in Randy because Randy could sing. He already knew all the songs. And plus, the deal was, I was only going to be in the band. I told Blackie I'd be in it for 7 months to a year, and then I was gone because I didn't want to be in a band like Sister. I didn't want to work like that. I wasn't happy. I don't want to play music and be unhappy. I want to do what Van Halen has done. I'd be like them.
But it was like a just in case they got signed kind of deal?
He promised a record deal within 6 months from me joining. That's why after Don quit, he was freaking out wanting to get it done.
On parting ways with Don Costa, Blackie said, "This was tough, as I had actively courted both Don and Tony Richards to leave the band they were in at the time. That band was called Dante Fox. They would later change their name to Great White."
I mean, we were already still like recording and stuff. We just started, I think there was better studios. We were in A&M and Capitol, and I don't know, we were all over the place. Baby O, I think, at the time. Like I said, we were recording all the time. We recorded shit in about every studio in L.A.
On recording the early W.A.S.P. demos, producer Ric Browde said,
I did the original tracks. My brother and I financed the album. I recorded a lot, which ended up on the album. It was settled in a legal case, but Blackie was so difficult to work with because he'd spend hours, and I do mean hours, debating whether his guitar was in tune. It was just dragging on and on. Blackie was into perfection. He'd nitpick, and you just like go, dude, you're hearing things that nobody else will ever hear other than yourself. Why are you doing this? What is it that you're really trying to do? If you can use the bulk of the first take, if it's reasonably good, it's going to have some excitement in it. But if you're working on the same vocal for 2 weeks, it's just not going to sound fresh. It's not going to sound inspired. And that's what I was missing out of Blackie. The 400th time that you're trying to pronounce Hellion. It's just like, why? Who cares anymore? You've lost the passion.
That was a session Brody was doing. I don't know whatever happened with him and Blackie.
but when you guys are working with Rick, that's like before you guys have the deal with Capitol, right?
Yeah. It was to get a recording so we could have something to shop around. Ric Browde was supposed to shop it around and help us get a deal.
Herman Robel, the Scorpions drummer, and I went and saw them. They asked us to produce them, and Herman was on the road doing the Scorpions, so I ended up doing it. Blackie assured me that he had $50,000 to do the album. And I was like, okay, cool, we'll do the album. This was the end of 1982, I think, that we started talking, and we started the recording right after the US Festival. So I come out to LA, and I was in those days living in New York, and Blackie confesses that he only has $1,500. I'm like, well, we're not going to do much, are we? And I'm just getting ready. He's just, well, we'll go to Vegas. We'll go to Vegas, and I'll make it $50,000. So we go to Vegas. We drive up. He puts it all on the roulette table, puts it on black. And I'm not much of a gambler, so I put $10 on red just because I figure one of us is going to go home happy. And he loses the entire budget. So we ended up recording at the dead of night at A&M Studios. We'd start after the Commodores would finish at like 1 or 2 in the morning. That's when we would start till like 10 or 11 in the morning when, some other band would get in. We spent all this time recording. Blackie just kept tuning the guitar and worrying about it in tunes. And he was really into everything's got to be separate. I'm like going, why? He's like, I don't want to have any leakage on the drum tracks. And I'm like, why? So he would make Tony Richards, who's the drummer, who was a junkie, record like just the kick, then just the snare, then just the tom-tom, then just the cymbals. Because he's like, this will make it pure. And Tony was a junkie, so he'd be so bored, he'd be shooting up. And so you'd hear boom, boom, boom. And then you'd hear him collapse on the floor with a needle in his arm.
He took us into A&M Records, where I think they did We Are the World, and they recorded We Are Stars. He took us in 82, 83. The Commodores were in the daytime, and we had recorded at night, like 12 o'clock to 8 in the morning. And we were done recording one day, and about 7, and I'm sitting out front, and this guy, it had to be 83. I'm sitting out front, and this guy pulled up right where you're not supposed to park, right in front. It's reserved for. It was reserved for him. I didn't know. But it's the most beautiful Jaguar, and the paint was just unbelievable. And when he got out of his car, I just went, man, I go, is that a stock paint job? And the guy stopped, and he goes, no. He goes, I just had it painted a few months ago. I go, that's a beautiful paint job. And he goes, you like it? I go, yeah. He goes, I got 4 other. I go, what do you mean? He goes, I got 4 other cars like that. I go, what? And come to find out, it was Richard Carpenter. And he was in the studio, and his sister had just died, I guess, a few months before, and he was going through some songs of hers. But he was way cool dude, man.
While we were there, Richard Carpenter was there doing the Death album for his sister, Karen Carpenter. Had died, so Carpenters are doing a memorial album. You want to hate Richard Carpenter because it's so saccharine and this, that, and here's this big heavy metal band. You go out on the porch, and they were all smoking cigarettes, and Richard Carpenter's talking about how he collects, I can't remember what type of car it was, whether it was Corvettes or something like that. And Chris goes, well, why did you sell one of the cars and feed your fucking sister? And, because Karen Carpenter died of anorexia. So kind of morbid.
I didn't know Rick that good, but he was a cool guy. He knew if we got a deal, it could be a big situation compared to all the bands that were happening at the time trying to get deals. Rat, Motley had already gotten They just gotten signed by some, I couldn't even tell you who.
Elektra.
It could have been. They had an EP come out, and they were just starting to. They'd played Magic Mountain, and they were just going up the ladder, and we hadn't got there yet. And then a few other bands got signed. Warrior did. Bakken, Great White. Everybody was signed. We weren't signed yet.
I had another album to do in Germany, and after 12 weeks of hanging out with trying to do W.A.S.P, Blackie thought it was disloyal, so he fired me and hired Mike Barney.
But was it coming together? Were you having full songs done by the time you leave the project?
Yeah, we had the bass. I mean, we didn't have any of this sweetening stuff, but we had the basic tracks. I remember I Want to Be Somebody, or another song called Hellion. I can't remember all the crap. I mean, most of the songs were throwaway anyway.
My only regret, Lawless said, is by the time we got to the point where we were actually signed and going to record the album for real, knowing what I know now, I would never have done that. We would have refused. We would have told EMI, no, we're going to release the demos. Because by the time we got to actually making the record, we had already done 3 sets of demos. At some point, we're going to release the demos because the demos are better than the album. The first set of demos, yes, they were crude, but they were still being polished. By the time we got to sets 2 and 3, those songs were locked. They were right where they needed to be, but there was a viciousness to them. I heard somebody say one time, it was like trying to rip open a can with a pair of pliers. That's what it sounded like. By the time it got to actually making the record, that was the 4th time around. It was refined, it was polished, but too polished.